Former US President Ronald Reagan revealed in early November that he was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. He'd become president at the age of 70 in 1981 and was now 85. His former party, the Republicans, meanwhile, were getting ready for the midterms. The Democratic Party had controlled the House of Representatives since 1952, and indeed since 1933 the Republicans had only had control of both houses for 4 years in total. Republican leader Newt Gingrich introduced a new strategy. Rather than each candidate running their own local campaign on local issues, there would now be a single Republican platform focused on criticising Bill Clinton, who, they said, had been elected on a promise to be a moderate centrist, but had instead returned to his leftist roots, raising taxes to spend and implementing radical policies like gun control and allowing gays to serve in the military. And with healthcare reform now on the agenda too, Gingrich's message, encapsulated in the Contract with America package of policies, cut through with enough voters to deliver a landslide win that would later be described as the Republican Revolution, gaining 54 seats in Congress and 8 in the Senate to take control of the former. More voting, this time in Europe, as on the day of the Australian Grand Prix, Sweden held a referendum on joining the European Union. Sweden had maintained neutrality during the Cold War, though, like fellow EU candidates Finland and Austria, the difference in political systems meant that it tended to lean towards the West culturally and be more integrated with the Western economic system. Sweden had been a founder member indeed of the European Free Trade Area, EFTA, in 1960, and in 1991, with the Cold War ending and a financial crisis threatening Sweden, Prime Minister Ingvar Carlsson opened negotiations to join the EEC. It took a year for them to agree to the principle of expansion, and another year and a bit for negotiations, but finally the I's were dotted and the T's crossed, and the 4 candidates, Sweden, Finland, Austria and Norway, were to hold referenda during 1994, with membership due to begin on the 1st of January 1995. Austria had already voted yes in June, and Finland in October, so supporters of the move were hopeful, and most of the mainstream parties were in favour, though there was opposition from the political left, Vänsterpartiet and Miljöpartiet. In the end, the vote was closer than in Austria and Finland, but was a narrow yes win, with, just as in those places, support strongest in the cities and opposition strongest in rural areas. For the record, the Norwegian referendum at the end of November rejected membership by almost exactly the same proportion as Sweden had approved it. And on the day after the race, the first Eurostar train departed London Waterloo to Paris Nord, the first scheduled passenger train direct from the UK to France in history. There had been plans to extend coverage north of London too, with a big new depot built at Longsight in Manchester to maintain the planned fleet of regional Eurostars, a shortened version of the quarter-mile-long international trains which wouldn't fit in British platforms, and Eurostar branding started popping up all over the UK rail network. A fleet of Night Star sleeper coaches was even ordered, with the aim of providing sleeper services from Scotland and to the south of France, but at the same time the government had just implemented the privatisation of British Rail, which was proving distinctly chaotic in its early days, and even had everything run smoothly, there was a difference between a national railway system investing in and operating such grand plans and a small private company like European Passenger Services, who now had the British shares. The extended Eurostar plans were delayed and put on hold several times before finally being abandoned in 2000, and the Nightstar coaches that had been built were sold to Via Rail in Canada, where they were renamed Renaissance and are still in use. It was with a sense of relief, as well as anticipation, that the F1 circus arrived in Adelaide for the 59th Australian Grand Prix and the 10th as part of the World Championship. The 1994 Grand Prix season had been a difficult one all round, and many would be glad to see the back of it, but at the same time the title race hadn't been this close in years, and even those who didn't fall into Team Damon or Team Michael were excited at the prospect of seeing a new world champion. Nigel Mansell had of course been new world champion 2 years earlier, but he'd been in the sport since 1980 and had so many near misses it didn't really feel like a new face. Of course, many, not least Schumacher himself, felt that the title race was only this close because Bernie and Max had spent the entire year throwing proverbial banana skins in his way, which would in their eyes rather delegitimise the title if Hill did win it. Michael was doing his best to remain focused on the race and try not to think or at least talk too much about that. Over at Williams, Damon Hill should have been feeling charged up and enthusiastic after his fantastic win in Japan, but he'd been talking to his friend Barry Sheene during some downtime on the Gold Coast, and returned to the motorhome once more feeling underappreciated. His contract was still based on being a support to Prost and Senna. He was on just £500,000 a year compared to the $14 million that Ferrari were allegedly paying Berger, the highest earner in the paddock at the moment. He vented his frustrations in a pre-race interview with Murray Walker, though I can't seem to find any further details of exactly what he said, and both he and the team spent the rest of the weekend reassuring everyone that they were absolutely all one big happy family totally focused on the championship. Hill or Schumacher, in fact, was the question on everybody's lips, and you got the sense that some people in the paddock were getting a little fed up of being vox-popped every couple of minutes by one TV crew or another.
Well, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a rich man. I think if there's no outside influence like reliability, on this circuit I think Michael will just have the edge.
Who knows? I don't know about these Formula One drivers. I'm not really into it. Sorry.
You don't know them?
No, I don't know them.
Michael, I think. Yeah, Michael Schumacher.
Luigi Martini, maybe.
I don't know why, but I like Williams.
Tricky one. Michael. I should say Damon really, being English, shouldn't I? But I think Michael. Maybe.
For me, Michael.
Michael. Yeah, sure.
Braunstrader.
I think Michael Schumacher.
I'm sure Michael Schumacher. The problem is I can't see into the future.
Tough fight, but Michael will take it in the end.
Hill.
Damon Hill. I think Michael
Schumacher will win.
You have not, the crystal ball.
So Damon Hill, pick it.
Because he's quickest.
I will. Oh.
Damon. I think he deserves it.
Damon Hill.
The Constructors' Championship was up for grabs too, of course, and there was a notable difference in attitude towards it from the two contenders. Luciano Benetton and Flavio Briatore were pretty clear that as far as they were concerned, well, it would be nice, but their main focus was on Schumacher's driver's title and the benefits in terms of media and sponsorship it would bring, while Frank Williams and Patrick Head were equally insistent that they regarded the team title as at least as important as the individual one, if not more so, because it rewarded everyone. Very few people were talking about anything else, but there was still news outside the top two teams. Sauber announced their new partnership with Ford and would become the new works team using the Zetec R engine in 1995, while in less surprising news, Ron Dennis formally announced the 1995 partnership of McLaren and Mercedes. Peugeot in turn announced their new link-up with Jordan, while Brian Hart's little outfit would now supply footwork. Heinz-Harald Frentzen seemed sufficiently optimistic about the new setup that he signed a new contract at Sauber. And not only that, but Mercedes had generously released Sauber from any outstanding debts, which would keep the factory doors open at Hinwil over the winter until a new sponsor could be found. Pacific had a new nose, an element of the new PR02 chassis that was being constructed ready for next year, though nobody, at least of all the team, expected it to make a decisive difference here. And there was one more round of driver musical chairs as Mimo Scattarella returned to the Simtech cockpit, and as promised, Jean-Denis Delatraz took over Larousse number 20, bringing to a frankly ridiculous 47 the total number of drivers for the season, an equally impressive 25 of whom had scored points so far. Car number 20, Jean-Denis Delatraz. Born in Geneva in 1963, Delatraz was a promising young driver, second in the Volant Avia scholarship programme in 1983, and 2 wins and 5 podiums in Formula Ford across 1984 and 85, coming third overall in the latter year in French FF 1600. He moved up to French F3 in 1986, and both French and British F3 in 1987, but results were suddenly harder to come by. While most drivers were reliant on sponsorship, though, Delatraz was apparently self-funded, though there are stories about him defaulting on payments. The old F1 Rejects website told of his F3 mechanics blockading his red Ferrari road car due to unpaid debts, only for him to turn up next week at a different team, with his Ferrari having been resprayed powder blue. He gave sports cars a go in 1988, but his main focus was on F3000, and it was a roller coaster of a season for the Swiss driver with 3 accidents, 3 DNQs and 2 podiums across 2 teams, placing him joint 8th with Pierre-Henri Raffanel. 1989 with first racing was a bust, and 1990 was worse. 2 DNQs, 2 crashes, and dropped after just 5 races. Then another 3 races at the start of 1991 saw a DNS, a DNQ, and a retirement, before legal action from his teammate Giovanni Bonanno over unpaid wages ended up in the team closing up shop anyway. With his career on the rocks, Delatraz tried French touring cars, without much success, but even so he managed to land a drive with the works Seat team for 1994, with a little more in the way of results. 5th at Nogaro was the highlight because the Spanish cars couldn't quite compete with the dominant Peugeots and Opels. But, although there was another story from a Porsche Carrera Super Cup race in '93 of his old F3000 mechanics showing up and blocking in his road car until he paid them outstanding wages, he did seem to at least have some money and was able to convince Gerard Larousse at least to give him a car for the weekend, replacing the popular Eric Comas, with watchmaker Frank Muller of Geneva now appearing on the car. Given his lack of recent results, the litany of pay drivers circulating through the back of the grid, and everyone's focus on the championship, Jean Denis' presence was barely noticed outside his team, and possibly Bertrand Gachot, who might hope he had a shot at making the grid. So off they all went for qualifying on Friday. Despite his good grid slot in Japan, Johnny Herbert was still having a lot of trouble getting to grips with the B194 and spun in a very awkward spot, leading Mansell to put himself in a controlled spin, avoiding him, a little way from Johnny as they both got going again in clouds of tyre smoke. Mansell gathered himself, put in another banzai lap, and took provisional pole off Schumacher. And as Schumacher was pushing hard to regain it, he had a big shunt, which ended the session a minute or so early. And when it rained on Saturday, Mansell had his 32nd career pole. Schumacher had to settle for second with Hill third, not ideal for Damon, who was just trying a bit too hard and would have to hope Nigel would prove accommodating, with Hakkinen fourth despite a skittish car. The Jordans were on row 3, Barrichello 5th and Irvine 6th, with Herbert still managing 7th alongside Alesi's Ferrari. Jean and Gerhard were both finding a simple lack of grip in the Ferrari, and the Austrian was down in 11th. Between the two was Brundle and Frentzen both suffering severe understeer, and the Sauber nervous over the bumps to boot, with Leto down in 17th. The Tyrrells were having gear selection problems in 13th and 15th, sandwiching Zanardi, still trying in the dreadful Lotus 109. The footworks were proving simply undrivable, a far cry from their early good performances, now down in 19th and 20th, though Morbidelli did raise spirits a bit by clocking 6th fastest in the wet on Saturday. And at the back, the usual suspects. The only real surprise was that complete rookie Delatraz was slightly quicker than almost rookie Schiattarella. Both were over 2 seconds behind their respective teammates. Gachot had an engine failure in the new car before setting a proper time on Friday and didn't even bother on Saturday, which allowed Belmondo to outqualify him for the second time all year, but still a second and a half off the back of the grid and nearly 8 off pole. There was a good crowd out as usual for the race, boosted not only by the prospect of a title race, the ever-popular Nigel Mansell on pole, and the presence of a local driver with the famous Brabham name, but by the announcement earlier in the year that 1995, next year, would be the last Grand Prix at Adelaide, after which the Australian round would move to Melbourne, long a sporting rival of Adelaide, and become the season opener. There was a delegation from Melbourne at the race, giving presentations and ready to take the journos, and any drivers who wanted to look, for a tour of Albert Park after the race. This was due to New South Australian state rules around tobacco advertising, but the news hadn't gone down very well with the locals, who'd always been very fond of their race, so they'd turned out in their droves, a total attendance estimated at a whopping 300,000, to show support and tell Bernie what they thought. By Sunday afternoon, the rain had gone, the skies were overcast but not threatening, and the track was nice and dry. As the media frenzy mounted, Hill and Schumacher exchanged a couple of words and a handshake away from the reporters, then understandably hid themselves away to try and focus. No such pressure on Mansell, who was asked about his prospects for the start by Murray Walker.
Now, I hate to point this out, but you're on the front row of the grid. You will anyway. But I will. You're on the front row of the grid with Michael Schumacher, who is a demon starter, and your last 2 starts haven't been all that sensational.
They've been wonderful, Murray. You mean I've been going backwards? Well, you know, the thing is, it's got to get a little bit better, but I seriously hope for the championship and certainly for Damon and Michael that the weather conditions are better. I don't think we really want the last race to be a lottery, and in these conditions on this type of circuit, I mean, it makes life very difficult.
Finally, though, 26 cars were out on the grid and each driver was preparing in his own way. Barrichello chatting on the walkie-talkie. Irvine shooting the breeze with Jordan PR head Louise Goodman. The Jordan team were hoping to still snatch fourth in the Constructors' Championship from McLaren, whose lead driver Mika Häkkinen walked the grid shaking hands with every other driver before strapping in. Mansell laid down some rubber as they headed off for the parade lap, and after all the build-up, all the talking, it was finally time to go, as the sun came out from behind the clouds just in time. Mansell muffed his start yet again, with Hill and Schumacher going either side of him, the German getting the better start and taking that vital lead, with Hill hot on his heels, Mansell third and Häkkinen fourth, until Nigel ran a bit wide at turn 5 and Mika and Barrichello also piled through. Schumacher was already pulling out 2.1 seconds at the end of lap 1, but Hill put up a fastest lap on lap 2 and started clawing it back again, leaving everyone else in the dust. Häkkinen in third was already 8 seconds back by lap 5. Behind him, Mansell and Barrichello had had a terrific scrap in Jerez and were renewing hostilities here, with a lazy waiting behind to pounce. Schumacher and Hill were trading fastest laps while Mansell continued chasing the Jordan ahead of him, while Johnny Herbert was dropping back with gearbox problems and was now 15th. It was looking very much like it was all going to be on Schumacher to win Benetton the Constructors' title, however much Signori Benetton and Briatore protested that they didn't really care about it. By lap 10 the leaders were already lapping the floundering Delatraz, Schumacher slipping past, and although the Swiss novice got out of the way as quickly as he could, the timing was awkward and Hill was held up for a vital 10th. Delatraz was actually not even in last place. Schiattarella had come in with a dicky gearbox and his Simtech was being worked on in the pits. As it turned out, though, Hill was quickly able to recover the lost time, though he got a bit ragged in the attempt. Noda in the other Larousse was next up, and this time Schumacher was the one to be held up slightly, allowing Hill to get right up behind again. Blundell, meanwhile, climbed the curb at Rundle Road and went skidding off, but managed to keep the engine running and the car out of the barriers, and wobbled back to the pits on some seriously flat-spotted tyres for new boots. Herbert came in too, his gearbox finally giving up the ghost. 2 starts and no finishes for Johnny. If this was his Benetton audition, he would have to hope his qualifying performances would be sufficient. Mansell, meanwhile, had got past Barrichello off-screen and was now bearing down on Häkkinen, as Fittipaldi was the first to stop for fuel on lap 15 of the 81. As Mansell pulled up behind Häkkinen, a lazy was now starting to hassle Barrichello, whose teammate Irvine lost his brakes and spun to a halt in the escape road, his Jordan smoking from every orifice. A lazy was next in, though, for a fuel stop, and next time around it was Schumacher and Hill. A head-to-head race between the pit crews, but they came out in the same order, Schumacher having gained a couple of tenths, and they were already so far ahead of Häkkinen that they came back out still in first and second place. The Finn himself was now fending off Mansell, who did the same as he'd done to Barrichello, took the place at the De Quetteville hairpin only to outbrake himself and restore the status quo. Next time round, though, it was Mika's turn to lock it all up, and Mansell was finally through. By then, Hill had dug deep and pulled back up behind Schumacher, having a go as the pair passed Lagos, as Hideki Noda's Larousse broke an oil line and expired smokily in the pits. It was turning into a cracking race, with the 2 championship contenders leading the race and going flat out, and everyone else driving on the limit too, and beyond it, as both the inexperienced Schiattarella and the very experienced Alesi demonstrated. Both got going again without losing a place, though in Memo's case that's because he was last already. Schumacher and Hill were now coming up on Martini and Fittipaldi, scrapping hard in the midfield. The Brazilian moved smartly over as Mansell pitted on lap 26. While the cameras were watching that, the leaders passed Martini, with Hill still following hard on Schumacher's rear wing. Häkkinen was in next, along with Barrichello, and the Jordan team turned Rubens round quicker, getting him out ahead as they both emerged right in front of a lazy, Häkkinen looking this way and that to try and get through. When Barrichello also went wide at Rundle Road, Häkkinen gratefully accepted the place, but a quick reacting Alesi managed to dart swiftly past Barrichello too, dive to the inside, then bully his way past Häkkinen into the hairpin. Fantastic stuff. That put Alesi up to 5th, with a yet-to-stop Berger 3rd and Mansell 4th. As lap 30 came and went, though, Schumacher was starting to slowly pull away from Hill, as both found Frentzen in 10th proving rather more reluctant to be lapped than most others so far. But he did at least hold both of them up by roughly the same amount as Berger made his stop. As the Ferrari regained the road just in front of its teammate, the cameras cut back to Schumacher just in time to see the Benetton finish bouncing off the wall at the exit of turn 5. Hill saw his opening and went for it as Schumacher moved across to the right.
Oh! Out goes Schumacher!
The Benetton was in the tyre wall, going no further today, and Schumacher climbed out. his face giving nothing away as he hopped through a gap in the fence and watched proceedings unfold. Now all Hill had to do was finish 5th or better to be the first son of a world champion to take the title himself. But he had a problem. The impact had punctured his left front tyre and, more seriously, bent the rearmost strut of his upper suspension wishbone. The Williams pit crew frantically got ready as Damon made his way slowly round and pulled in. Tyres and fuel were easy enough, but that wishbone wasn't going to work. Patrick Head literally tried to pull it straight as Hill sadly shook his head. It didn't matter how many mechanics pushed it, pulled it and poked at it, that wishbone was not safe to drive with. And so it was over. Schumacher was world champion, Williams were constructors' champions, and Mansell was leading the race, 3.2 seconds ahead of Berger in second place, with Alesi, Hakkinen, Barrichello and Brundle now making up the top 6. The Benetton mechanics celebrated, but it took a couple of minutes for a fire marshal to tell the man himself, still standing at the side of the track. The championship was all over, but the race was very much still on as Alesi made his second stop only to stall due to a tyre valve failure and spend 30 seconds stationary before moving again, now 9th. So it came down to 2 of the veterans at half distance as Berger tried to chase down Mansell, with Hakkinen holding 3rd with Barrichello in pursuit. Rubens pitted on lap 50, dropping behind Brundle. Then on lap 54 Mansell came in from the lead, as did Hakkinen from 3rd. Mansell's stop put Berger in the lead, but the Ferrari mechanics were getting ready too. Having done a long first stint, Gerhard was doing a 2-stop race after all. A disaster for Jordan as Rubens Barrichello was given a penalty for speeding in the pit lane, as had Jean-Denis Delatraz a couple of laps earlier, which was ironic really because he hadn't really been showing an excess of speed anywhere else. As Rubens prepared to serve his penalty, Berger made his stop. Would he be able to get out ahead of Mansell? Yes, but not by much, and now he was on cold tyres with Mansell right behind. They may not have had a world championship to fight over, but that didn't mean they weren't up for it. Mansell had a look at the end of the Brabham Straight, but perhaps with his earlier indiscretions in mind, bailed out before contact was made. If Hakkinen was hoping they'd take each other out and he could swoop for his maiden win, he was to be disappointed as he too was given a stop-go penalty. And Alesi made his second pit stop and was again delayed, this time by 13 seconds. As Mansell continued harrying Berger and looking for an opening, Hakkinen came in for his penalty, handing 3rd to teammate Brundle. That was lap 63, there were just 18 to go. After Japan, if Mansell was getting tired of looking at the back of a Ferrari, he wouldn't have to for much longer. On the next lap, Berger was the latest man to climb the curbs at Rundle Road, going well wide and letting Mansell through. The Williams evidently could have been going faster because as soon as he was through, he immediately put his foot down and started pulling away, as Barrichello chased Hakkinen for 4th, with both of them gaining on Brundle, and Blundell was attacking Frentzen for 7th. The race was still very much on, even if Mansell looked like he was now cruising to the win. The battle for 7th was decided in Frentzen's favour when he slammed the door on Blundell off camera and the pair touched, spinning the Tyrrell into retirement but not damaging the Sauber. Unfortunately for the leaders, as HH didn't seem to have got the memo everyone else had about getting out of the way of the leaders. In fact, he thought the Ferrari behind Mansell was Alesi, who was behind him in chasing, and hadn't realised it was the second-place man, Berger. Soon enough, Alesi was behind the pair of them, which seemed to clue Frentzen in, and he moved over, only to lose the place to Alesi anyway, diving through in Berger's slipstream. 10 laps to go now, and Berger wasn't done yet, putting his foot down and starting to reel in Mansell, with Alesi sticking with him and hoping to catch Panis in the points, while Hakkinen was still charging after his own teammate, who was a very achievable 2.5 seconds ahead of him. Until, that is, the number 7 McLaren's brakes failed at over 250 km an hour along the Brabham Straight, pitching him into a terrifying spin along the wall and into the escape road. Dazed and winded, but fine. With now just 3 laps to go, Mansell was lapping Panis, now in 5th place, but just like with Frentzen earlier, Olivier thought Berger coming to lap him was Alesi coming to take his place away, and spent the last 2 laps of the race blocking Gerhard and preventing any further chance of him catching Nigel for the win. So, after 81 laps, Nigel Mansell came in for his 31st career win at the age of 41 to set the seal on his comeback and give the Williams team something to celebrate, with Berger 2nd and Brundle 3rd, Barrichello 4th, then Alesi and Panis in the points, with Frentzen, Fittipaldi, Martini, Leto and Lagos the remaining runners, and a battered Hakkinen the last man classified in 12th. After a season that had seen so much in the way of exciting new talent, it was 3 of the most experienced drivers in F1 who took to the podium, 41-year-old Mansell, flanked by 35-year-olds Berger and Brundle, a total of 111 years and 479 Grand Prix starts between them, and Mansell remained the last man over 40 to win a Formula 1 Grand Prix. It was a popular win at the circuit. Certainly the Aussies had very much taken Nigel to their hearts after his 1986 heartbreak. Williams team manager Ian Harrison took the trophy for the race-winning constructor, a fine send-off for him as he left the Williams Grand Prix team to take up a senior role at Williams Touring Car Engineering, a new venture for the 1995 British Touring Car Championship, running Renault Lagunas, with Hill's race engineer John Russell in charge of the technical side. As the veterans headed for the press conference, along with the freshly minted world champion Michael Schumacher, and the crowd began to disperse, thoughts returned to that collision on lap 36. Had Schumacher deliberately turned in on Hill knowing his own car was damaged, or was it an instinctive defending of his place in the heat of the moment? Well, that would be endlessly debated for, well, the next 31 years and counting, and after all the twists and turns of the 1994 season, perhaps it could only have ended that way, mired in arguments and controversy. In the immediate aftermath, though, both contenders seemed magnanimous. Schumacher could afford to be, of course, he'd won, but even so his comments at the press conference were no doubt welcome, though he naturally stopped short of admitting any fault in today's accident.
I have to say that I did make some comments this year that about Damon, that I didn't have that kind of respect that I maybe had about somebody else, but I have to admit that I was wrong, because what he has done in the last two races in particular, and he must have done even before, has been a proper and fantastic job, and it has been a great rival, and I must say sorry for what I maybe said, but I'd like to congratulate him for all his good jobs he has done so far.
Hill, interviewed while the race was still on, likewise chalked it up to a racing incident.
You couldn't really do any more than that, could you? No, and I saw the opportunity. I thought I've got to go here, and it didn't happen. So in other words, you'd say that's sport, that's racing. I'm afraid so. That's motor racing. I'm afraid that going into the last race with 1 point deficit to Michael is always going to be, unfortunately, putting you in the position where you've got everything to lose. Well, I couldn't win in that sort of situation, and I think I would want to say that everyone in the Williams team deserves some sort of medal this year, because we've been through a hell of a tough time, and to be here at least at the last race fighting to win the championship and looking very strong, looking competitive. The Renault engine was strong and the whole team were terrific, and I'd just like to say thanks to all of them this year, and we'll come back next year.
His claim for a McLaren seat in 1995 too, but if he wasn't kept on, where would he go? Veteran Michele Alboreto had been told that Minardi had decided to give Luca Badoer his seat for 1995, the younger man having been relegated to testing duties after the merger of Minardi and Scuderia Italia, so would this be Michele's swan song? Many said he'd retire from F1 after 14 years and go and race DTM, but he insisted he still wanted to drive for a competitive team.
I have no plans for next year, that's for sure. I didn't make any decision for what I'm going to do in the next season, as I did last year, as I did 2 years before. So during the winter we'll see which opportunity I can find, and then I will decide.
Some magazines write.
And of course there were questions over the financial health of, among others, Lotus, Larousse, Simtek and Pacific, but there were also prospects of more new teams joining the grid. Guido Forti's successful F3000 team were known to want to make the step up, as did the French team Dams, while Lola had built the T9530 and were making noises about entering F1 in their own right, and both Dams and a new venture called Junior Formula 1 team were both said to be interested in buying or going into some partnership with Larousse. 1995 was going to look quite different, it seemed.